Jesus. Amen. We have Mark's version of Jesus in the wilderness. But before we get to that, I want to recap what Mark tells us about Jesus' baptism. How it's literally an invasion, and we're not going to get back into it. We did it during the youth worship service. But Jesus has the sky torn open. The Spirit descends upon him. God sings praises and says, "This is my beloved. This is the pride of my heart. Now get out in the wilderness." And then we're told immediately the Spirit pushes him out into the wilderness. I use the message today because it relays the idea of Jesus being pushed, not necessarily going willingly, going, but not going singing hymns and praises unto God. The NRSV says that he was driven. Now, it doesn't mean that the Spirit borrowed the Father's SUV and took him out into the wilderness and left him for a venture crew camping. It means that he was going to be out there and he had to survive on his wits. Mark also does not include that there was a 40-day fast. We're just told that he was out there living off the land. He was out there practicing a wilderness journey that Israel had gone through. It is thought by a lot of the scholars that the whole 40 days of fasting came in later into the understanding of the church, kind of lifting up Jesus' Christology, his divinity. A lot of scholars believe that Mark's gospel, which is the shortest gospel, which is the gospel that was probably akin to the very oral tradition of Jesus, is probably the one that is relaying something that's a little more truthful to the first century church. And they say that because Paul, in his letters, he's all over the understanding that Jesus is the new Adam. Jesus is the second Adam. Jesus is the first fruit of this new kingdom, as Adam was the first fruit of the old kingdom. And it makes this looking at this wilderness journey a little more interesting. In fact, as I was reading and trying to figure out what Mark is trying to relate to us about this story about Jesus in the wilderness, I started thinking about two programs that were on a couple years ago. I don't even know if they're still on. But one was called Man vs. Wilderness with Bear Grylls, and the other one was called Survivorman with Les Stroud. Both of them were on the premise of someone being out in the wilderness and trying to figure out a way to survive. Whether you were out there because of an accident, whether you were out there and got abandoned or whatever. But how do you survive in the wilderness? And they took two different types of approaches. When I first started watching Les, I used to go, "Oh, he's the whiner," because he's always whining about trying to make it through, trying not to use up too many calories, and he just always seemed to be under great stress. But the neat thing was he left less of a footprint. Bear Grylls was from Special Ops in the I think it was the Royal Navy, where he spent time in the desert going through Legionnaire training and all that stuff. And in fact, in one of the series, I remember he was shown how to catch caribou. If you're interested. He took his clothing and some vines and he wrapped them around and he created this rope X through those trees and found a herd of caribou and chased them that way. And his hope was one of them would get caught. And one did. And then he would kill it, eat what he could from it, wear his hide, and be on his merry way. Les, on the other side, on the flip side, he took a different approach. He was in the Arizona desert, which is very akin to the wilderness that Jesus was in. And his goal was to try to survive those 7 days by finding water or finding something that had water within it, whether it was a yucca plant or a cactus or something. Find something to eat. He didn't want to use a lot of energy chasing down animals, so he picked on the insects. He ate scorpions and locusts and whatever else he could put down without having to worry about keeping it down. His tip is, though, that scorpions do taste better than locusts. He said locusts taste a little bit too much like grass, where scorpions got a different flavor, a different bouquet. He says a little easier to handle. But the one thing I realized was this man was not about consuming and subduing, but he was about living in harmony with it. That was his goal, was to find that balance. To find a way, as he said at the end of the 7 days, to leave as little of a footprint as he could. And as I was reading this about Jesus and I was taking note of the difference of Mark from the other Gospels, I start to think, is that what Mark is trying to get across to us? And as I started to read, to do some cross-referencing, and I came across Paul's letter, and I've read him before, but it really never registered in this way. In Romans, when he starts talking about justification by grace through faith, and he starts talking about Jesus reconciling us back to God, and then he starts connecting them to Adam, and how Adam was the one that took us into this broken relationship. It's Jesus that's going to lead us out. And I started to think about the way that the Gospels are structured, especially Mark. And Mark, in a way, with Jesus as the survivor man, is kind of putting the truck in backwards, in reverse, and trying to back us out of these broken relationships. And he's beginning with creation itself. Because if you remember the Adam and Eve story, you remember how it spun out of control. And the last one to be cursed is the serpent. But not just the serpent, all animals. Because fear grew within the animals, because guess who helped cover the sin? Covered the brokenness of Adam and Eve. An animal. So that God could cover them with its hide. Here we have Jesus not looking to consume them, but to live in harmony with them. And in the broad spectrum of Mark's Gospel, that's what Jesus' life entails. Because he'll come out of this wilderness, but then he will continue to go in wilderness of relationships. As he is rejected in his hometown when he goes to preach his first sermon. Remember that? He preaches to them about the year of Jubilee, and they want to pick him up, carry him on their shoulders, not to some place of praise, but they want to throw him off the cliff. Because he's messing with things that should not be messed with in attempting to restore these relationships. Adam broke it, but Jesus will repair it. Not by consuming and surviving that way, but creating right relationships the whole way. Whether it's with a leper, whether it's with a paralytic, whether it's with a woman at the well, whether it's with a sinful woman who wants to wash his feet, whether it's with a Pharisee by night, Jesus is constantly working on fixing those relationships with the very gifts that God gives us. All of us. And I think that's the neatest thing about Mark's Gospel. Jesus is not out there fasting for 40 days according to Mark. He's out there living in the environment. He's out there using the gifts that he has given in bone and flesh and making it work. And I think Mark's trying to scream to us, we can make it work too. The excuses of saying, oh, woe is us, that we're just broken nature because of Adam. Mark's saying that's not the way it is anymore. Because of what Jesus did with bone and flesh, we can do it too. The authority that was given to him, he gave to the church. Mark is trying to get us to realize that we have been reconciled. reconciled with God, and now we have the tools to reconcile ourselves with each other and even our world. It's not beyond our reach. That's what he's trying to tell us. Paul, in that same portion of Romans, also tells us this story about this relationship with us and God through Jesus Christ, that we are called the bride. And I think we are called a bride because of that relationship that Jesus is creating with us and with God is one that we are being brought into the family in a wonderful way, in an intimate way, in a way that gives us a bond that is so strong. But I think there's something else unique about calling us a bride. And I think it goes along with this wilderness journey and this idea of backing up this truck out of this brokenness into the righteousness of God. Because if we go back to the Adam story, if we go back to the Adam and Eve story, and remember how that unfolds, you know, God saying, you can have everything you want, except for just one tree. Just leave that one alone for right now. Where does Adam and Eve go? To that tree. Now Eve picks it first, but Adam's standing right there in the story. It's not like he's off plowing the field and come home and Eve deceives him. He's standing right there. And she takes it. She sees it's tasteful. It's something to be desired. She gives it to him. And he does the same thing. Now remember, this is his bride. Bone of bone, flesh of flesh. For this reason, a man shall leave his mother to be with his wife. What happens the next time God comes walking through the garden? They hear his footsteps in the cool mist. And they've taken their newfound wisdom and they hide from God. Brilliant. Not only that, they took leaves and covered themselves. Brilliant. Well, when they finally have to give themselves up, God asked them the question, why were you hiding? Well, we were naked and we didn't want to show you. Really? How long have I been looking at you? Now all of a sudden? All right. Did you eat the tree I told you not to? Who told you that? Now, this is where Adam really shows his brilliance. What does he say? The woman. He doesn't stop there. Who you gave me. There's using your wisdom smartly. But what happens is Adam throws his bride under the bus in this garden story. The beauty of Mark is that with relaying the idea that the church is the bride of Christ, building on that, we remember when Jesus was in the garden the last time. Remember that one? Where he asked them to stay awake, and he got a little frustrated because they couldn't. Well, then the guards showed up. And when there was a chance for Jesus to get out of it, when they say they're looking for Jesus, he could have easily said, well, just these are his followers, take these rabble-rousers. He doesn't do that. He doesn't throw the bride under the bus. Instead, he says, leave them alone. I'm the one you're looking for. The new Adam completely brings the truck, the bus, whatever you want to call it, out of that garden of brokenness and brings it into the garden of reconciliation. Because instead of the bride being thrown under the bus, this new Adam stands his place and says, I'm the one you're looking for. And he does it in bone and flesh like us. Not some divine hovering God that's an apparition. But as you and I, cut on the 8th day, felt all the pains that we have felt all the brokenness, experienced them, even with his disciples. and he refused to throw them under the bus. As we continue on this journey of Lent, I pray that we won't be so focused on giving things up that we forget about things that we should be doing and restoring those relationships that Jesus began. I hope that these 40 days will be marked with us letting us, our imagination, think of ways of how we can reconcile our lives and the relationships in our lives. Whether husband and wife, sister or brother, cousin, grandparents and children, neighbors, strangers, even our enemies. Jesus went out in the wilderness to prove that this flesh and bone is no longer an excuse of living in our brokenness. That now through Him, we have the opportunity to reconcile and restore the relationships that we are in. Not by consuming and with power, but learning how to live in harmony, following Jesus' lead of compassion. And if we do that, we'll be amazed at where this 40 days of Lent will take us as well. Amen.